I think it has legs. I think it could do well. And if you like Game of Thrones, this certainly won't correct the betrayal of those last couple of seasons being real bad. But it will. We're done watching season 1 of House of the Dragon. And this is not a video to summarize everything that happened. I don't want to spoil anything here. This is for the casual viewer. If you are looking for a show to watch and you're like, well, I watched some of Game of Thrones and I kind of like that. Should I finish Game of Thrones first and then watch this? Should I watch this period, honestly? I'm not a huge Game of Thrones fan. I did watch all 8 seasons and was one of the people disappointed by the ending of it. It was captivating, it was, popular to watch, and it's just something to talk to people about. So here's what I can tell you as somebody who just watched every episode of House of the Dragon in terms of, is this a show worth your time? This is the Better Call Saul of the Game of Thrones universe. And what that means is it's the prequel show to something that was a cult classic, that has become a cult classic. So Breaking Bad was an amazing show. The actors, the producers, the editors, everybody on that show was brilliant. And we got to live in that world a little bit more, but rather than carrying on the story, we did a little bit more setup. Instead of going 2 or 3 years earlier, like they do in that show, this goes back like 2 centuries, I think. And it focuses on just one family. Game of Thrones was really cool because you got to A, go into another world, B, see the politics of all these things, C, see all the magic and the mythology of this alternate universe. And it was medieval, and there were, it was compelling. But what was really neat about it is that it was sprawling, and episodes jumped around from place to place, and you were sort of putting together a lot of different narratives all at once, with stories that were separate but interconnected in a global sense. So this, right out of the gate, I will tell you, focuses on one family for the first season. And that's a little bit of a letdown for somebody who enjoyed the complexity of Game of Thrones. So there's that. Next, the pacing is kind of weird. Some episodes take place in a day. Some span, a couple of weeks or months. In between episodes, we jump 20 years or 1 year. And it's not necessarily explicit, but they hint and you put that all together. They swap out actors, and to make things a little more difficult, they also name people a lot of the same things. A lot of the names sound similar. So if you're just casually watching this, I don't know if you can. You got to pay attention. So yeah, this is not for the sitcom watcher who's just like looking to tune out and relax at the end of the day. This is some intentional viewing, let's say that. There's some things that are exactly like Game of Thrones. The production value is unmatched. It's a beautiful show to watch. They use the same theme song. A lot of familiar names, surnames, not, first and last. There's a lot of sex, there's a lot of mythology, there's a lot of self-serious acting, and if you can't take fantasy seriously, you shouldn't watch this show. Although I will say the fantasy element, like, we had to sort of earn dragons in Game of Thrones. That came a lot later. Dragons, I think first 2 episodes, like we're already seeing them. They're just sort of commonplace, which is sort of the point. And the fantasy element seems to be about the building the culture and building the world of Westeros and King's Landing. We see that more in, like, how do the townspeople live and what are the customs of the seediest, grossest, weirdest parts of, you know, medieval debauchery. Personally, I don't find that super entertaining. Yes, it's redefining fantasy as depravity, and I'm just not into it. I don't think it makes the story better. We'll say that. So just as much sex as there was in Game of Thrones, but I will caution you, it's a lot weirder. The other stuff that, like, takes over the fantasy, we had White Walkers and we had magic and, like, people who cast spells and all this stuff. Right now we basically have dragons and, here's one spoiler, abortion tea, which you just drink and you're good. It's morning after tea, I guess. If there's one thing that really bugs me about this show, is that, unlike Game of Thrones, I really couldn't find a character that I liked. There's no likable characters. In Game of Thrones, you have Tyrion.
I drink and I know things.
Everybody likes Tyrion. He was a fun underdog character. We could root for him. He wasn't as self-serious as everybody else.
My experience, eloquent men are right. Every bit as often as imbeciles.
We don't really have a jokester in this, or anybody with a sense of humor, it seems. And honestly, I really, really dislike the main character, Rhaenyra. I don't know if it's the acting or the writing.
I wish to raise my cup to her grace.
Or just what they've shown us in the show. I don't think she's a good leader. I don't think she's a sympathetic character. I'm not rooting for her, and yet for some reason they're telling me this story. Her father, I think it's episode 1, he wants to name his daughter Rhaenyra heir. It's unheard of, it's not done, it's a purely irrational, emotional reaction to his wife's death, and every decision that he makes is just kind of dumb. There's really no better word for it. Some of the characters in Game of Thrones, you could be like, that's smart, that's a smart move, or that's different, or I wasn't expecting that, or, oh, it's not that it's not smart, it's that this person's a jerk, or this person has a different agenda. Here, I was just like, he's just dumb. And so it's hard to take that kind of stuff seriously. Another thing is that everybody in this show, everybody in House Targaryen has ridiculously bright platinum blonde hair, and I don't think one of the actors playing these bastards have even remotely blonde hair. I don't know, but it just looked very fake, and I harped on this before, but for all the other really high production values of the show, that's something that just took me out of so many scenes. And so it's a little silly there. The season finale was the first episode that really felt like Game of Thrones again, because it wasn't just focused on one family and one house. And we started seeing the rest of the world and these different stories that aren't so self-contained affect each other. That's the complex storytelling that I liked from Game of Thrones. It's unfortunate that it took me 10 episodes to say that I really liked an episode. But I guess this was all the setup that they had to do for everything that follows. And so all I can tell you on that front is, you know, if they're setting up a good show, they've done the setup. Sometimes the first season of a show is hard to get through, and then it's smooth sailing afterwards. That's the case in a lot. So even though I wasn't crazy about the first season, I think it has legs. I think it could do well. And if you like Game of Thrones, This certainly won't correct the betrayal of those last couple of seasons being real bad. But it will take you back there, and you'll hear some familiar names, and you'll get that same production value. I don't think the writing is as good. If you like George R.R. Martin's, names that are slightly different than real names, there's a lot of those. For these prequel shows, they always kind of feel like fan fiction to me. And granted, these are based on other George Martin literature, with, I think, some extra, room for interpretation. It's not compelling on its own. If you hadn't, I don't think you could watch this and appreciate everything in it if you hadn't watched Game of Thrones. Whereas in Better Call Saul, you can. I think it enhances the show if you've seen Breaking Bad. But it might also enhance Breaking Bad if you watch Better Call Saul first. So I don't think that's the case for House of the Dragon. Nothing has really informed Game of Thrones in a way that changes it or contextualizes things differently. At least not to a casual observer like me. So yeah, if fantasy is your thing, I don't know, you might be better off watching Rings of Power. But I don't know, I didn't watch it. The show relies so heavily on shock. There's some gritty murder stuff, there's some appalling social ideas, like things that people are doing in town underground. There's some weird fetishes, and just there's a lot of really gross stuff in this show. So it's not always pretty. Sometimes it's gritty. You can quote me on that. And yeah, I don't know. At the end of the day, did I love it? No. But I do think that it's setting up something good. That could be good. I won't promise that it's good. So yeah, that's what I think going into it. Should you watch it? Up to you. If you liked a character or had a reason for liking a character, let me know, because I liked Aemond more because he just seemed like an actual person. Tell me what you think of this show, and where do you think that it's going after this? In the meantime, subscribe to this channel, because we're just sort of talking about movies and shows, and we love it when people are part of the conversation. We have a weekly podcast, and are always putting out stuff like this. So yeah, that's what I think about House of the Dragon, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okie dokie, that's it for me.
For the eyes of thousands, every symbol...
It's best to be certain.